Yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm looking forward to this. I have to get my Samsung Fold out so I can get my notes. But
that was great product placement right there.
It is.
And it's a very cool device.
By the way.
That's the phone that folds, right?
It is. Watch this.
That is so cool.
Very cool.
Very cool.
And it even keeps all my notes on it. So let's get to it, yeah? To say it's been a disruptive few years for all companies would be a mighty understatement. Obviously, ABI, one with global presence as you have and a very complicated supply chain. We talked a little bit about this upstairs, and I want to congratulate you on the triple crown of creative wins this year, and you can tell everybody about that. But what gave you the confidence in this uncertain world to kind of really look and embrace new and disruptive advertising when so much is so different?
Yeah, I think given the change that we're seeing both with consumers, that we're seeing with the economy, that we're seeing with technology, the only thing that we know for certain is that the future is uncertain, right? And so I think there's a couple different ways that we think about this. First, it's about how do you develop the right partnerships across different aspects of your business that enable you to learn and see things that you wouldn't see on your own. I think the second thing is really focusing on this idea of effectiveness. So like you mentioned, Michael, we are really excited and proud to be both the Cannes Marketer of the Year, also #1 with WARC for creative effectiveness, and #1 with Effie's for creative effectiveness. And I believe it is the first time that a company has done all three of those in the same year. And a lot of that comes from this maniacal focus on, create things that people really want. And so I think that's been a really big part of our recipe as well. And then I think the third thing is you have to keep innovating to keep pace with where consumers are going, whether that's in the ad tech space, whether it's in the product space, whatever it is. It's really about having that focus on what consumers are looking for. Yeah.
And so you mentioned the economy and all of our kind of all holding our breath at the moment. How are you starting to think about, as you head into 23, the economy impacting consumers, and then kind of from both a messaging standpoint as well as a media planning standpoint? I know you obviously work on a lot of different places on a global basis, and you're focused on occasions and activations, but I'd love just kind of a quick point of view on that as well.
Yeah, I think going into this, we're thinking a lot about what we learned during COVID in 2020, right? So another moment where all the plans that we had were sort of all of a sudden irrelevant. And what we did at that moment is we really went back to the basics. So we got together as a team. We said, we don't know what's coming. We know we're in a weird moment that we don't understand. We said the first thing is, how do we understand what consumers need in this exact moment? So to give an example is we understood that there were a lot of consumers who wanted to keep working out, right? Very normal, because you might get let out at any moment and you want to make sure you look good when you get back outside, right? But you don't know when that's going to be. Or another thing was, first there was this period of fear, I think, during the pandemic, and then there was this extreme period of boredom. So we started to think about, how can we deliver and innovate against those solutions? One example of how we sort of came up against that is we created a 2-month-long music concert series in Brazil. It was actually one of the #1 live streamed events, I think, on YouTube at a certain point, that was really just focused on entertaining people because we understood that to be a core pain point. So at this moment going forward, we're doing the exact same exercise. We work on a global process, together as a team where we're looking at what is the real consumer need in the moment. We have these open briefs. We call it ideas for growth. And we brief those out across the entire world, about 2,000, 2,500 marketers, something like that. And we come back with, great ideas, hopefully. And the things that work really well, we start to scale those. So I think it's about understanding consumer need and that being able to be agile and nimble as it relates to that.
So we'll shift a little bit into maybe something a little bit more fun and some stuff that we've worked on together, which is the McEnroe versus McEnroe program on ESPN Plus event, I should say. Take us a little bit through that strategy. Obviously, we worked together on that and helping promote it. It's interesting because it was content that you were sponsoring, but it wasn't, the promotion around it wasn't necessarily for branding. It was much more around tune-in.
Yes.
Which is interesting for a CPG marketer to get into the tune-in business.
Yes, it was a first for us, and we were really excited about it. I don't know how many people in the audience are tennis fans. Anyone? Just one, two? Wow. Okay. All right.
There's a bunch over there.
Thank you. Thank you. Bunch of Giants fans. So I don't know if you've ever asked yourself the question of how would I do if I competed against myself? But we asked John McEnroe that question. We said, what would it look like if you played yourself in tennis, your old self when you were at the peak of your performance, which was the first time I think anyone's ever done that. It was very cool. It's very competitive for him, being competitive with yourself. But I think what was really cool is how we worked together to understand the consumer journey there, right? So we worked with ESPN in order to create that piece of content, which wasn't really an ad. It was really the experience to watch an actual match of McEnroe versus McEnroe. And then thinking about, okay, how are consumers going to find out about this incredible first of its kind event? And where are places that consumers' habits are starting to shift? We know that they're on a lot of connected TV devices, and we saw a huge opportunity to drive tune-in, which, yeah, is not something we normally do. We're normally, blasting ads and saying, hey, think about our brand. But in a place where to cut through and be creatively effective, we believe it's about solutions and things that are of interest to consumer. We thought that was an amazing opportunity. And I think we saw like a 66% uplift for, those who tuned in via connected TV with Samsung relative to other modes that we were using. So we were super excited and happy with that.
And we were super excited about those results as well. So well done. Thank you.
If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. It's actually very cool.
Actually very cool. Yeah. And to answer your question, I would have a lot of double faults against myself.
You think?
Yes, I definitely would. So Super Bowl's right around the corner, right?
Yeah.
It's always a big thing for you guys. What are your thoughts around extending, activating on streaming platforms? How are you thinking about connecting with consumers on streaming platforms during that period, leading up to that period, and post that period?
So I think Super Bowl, increasingly, there are more people who are watching, not on a linear television device, for sure. And from the beginning, we have always worked really hard to think about where are consumers paying attention. At the end of the day, if consumers aren't paying attention, we don't want to be there. And if there is consumer attention in another place, we want to make sure that we're there. And the Super Bowl is no exception. So certainly thinking about, linear and audiences that are still there, but also thinking about people who are tuning in via streaming. So our buys are very diverse, I would say, and reflect, the reach that we're trying to attain in order to build our brand successfully.
That's great. So one last sports question, which is World Cup. So exciting in the fall, winter this year because of the host country. Would love to hear a little bit about your thoughts on activating. You mentioned a stat to me upstairs, which is it's like 0.1% of World Cup fans will ever attend a World Cup. So it's mainly a television experience, but you're doing some interesting things in some other non-host countries where you're activating. So let's talk a little bit about the media, but also talk about your activations and how you're kind of using this on a global stage.
Yeah, we've been a partner with the World Cup since 1986, so another very long-standing partnership that we've had. And when I started getting deep into World Cup, this is my first World Cup that I've been super actively involved with. I never thought about how few people actually go to a World Cup. It's kind of like the Super Bowl, right? Very few people actually go to a Super Bowl. So you think about, man, like so many fans around the world. I think there's about 2 billion people that will watch at least some portion of the World Cup during November and December. And you think about how can we deliver something that's meaningful to them? Because if you just focus on what's happening at the actual host country, you're not going to be able to build the right relationship or really touch, consumers in a way that successfully adds value to their experience. So for the first time ever, we're partnering with FIFA to bring the FanFest experience that normally is only in the host country to 7 different countries around the world, where we will be trying to create as close as you can get to the World Cup without being at the World Cup. And that was the insight. It was like 0.1% of people will ever go to a World. It's not an insight. It's a data point. Let's put it that way. And then what are the things about the World Cup that really excite people? And what do you miss if you're not there in person? And how can we bring those things to people when they're not in person?
So shifting into a little bit, you talked about kind of consumer habits. We've talked a little bit about occasions, which was an interesting point. Whether it's seltzers or the non-alcoholic category for beer, talk a little bit about the consumer habits that you're following, about the insights that you're gleaning, and then how you're kind of translating that, especially around the occasion effort, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, so I think I've never worked in the car industry, but my guess in the car industry is like it's much more about, selling specific vehicles to specific people. But in beverage, everyone consumes multiple beverages, right? So we know that occasion is actually the number one driver of choice. So where are you? Who are you with? That automatically sets a consideration set that then you go, okay, these are the brands I would think about consuming now. Which of those do I want to actually consume? So I think non-alc is a really great example of when we focus on and study occasions, we start to understand how people are changing. So I think historically, we as an industry believe that non-alcohol beer was for people who are abstaining from the alcohol category. What we've now started to learn through a lot of, data-driven work that we've been doing via media and via content is that in reality, it's a way of creating another drinking moment for people. So actually, most people that drink non-alcoholic beer, they drink alcohol, which was very surprising for us a couple of years ago when we started to realize and recognize this. And this is a shift and a change in consumer habits from what we've seen historically. And so for us, it's about how do we innovate and meet that moment in the right way so that consumers have, whatever option they want available when they need it.
So talk a little bit about your understanding of consumer habits. You talked about through consumer data that you have. I think in the previous session there was a talk about not having that. You don't have a direct consumer relationship. You don't sell directly to consumers per se, right? I
can tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and it was interesting to hear the gentleman from Pepsi speaking about this. Very similar to Pepsi, right? We don't sell direct. We sell through stores, we sell through bars, we sell through restaurants. In a couple markets in the world, we are actively working on creating our own direct-to-consumer business. So in Latin America and Europe, where legally that's an option for us. And it's not about making that our entire business, but it's about how do you create a learning pipeline for yourself as an organization, right? Because if we can start to extract and build learnings and insights from a channel that is even 3%, 5% of our total mix, and we can use those in the rest of our business, that can create a lot of uplift and a lot of halo. So we're doing a lot of innovation testing in direct to consumer. We're using a lot of those first party relationships that we're building to then model and extrapolate into what we're doing in the rest of our media buying and planning. And so I do believe that relationship is super, super critical. Now, we are also working on building active digital communities that we do very similar things with. So a good example, we just launched last week our Budweiser World Cup NFT program. And the week prior to that, we launched our Bud Light NFL NFT program. If you are deep in the NFT space, which I am just a dabbler personally, I think it really started as, hey, here's a cool piece of art that you can pay a lot of money for and have like a digital record of, right? There's a small niche marketplace for that, I'm sure. But increasingly, like where this is going is it's about becoming a member of a specific community, right? So our NFL program is about a weekly pick'em game where when you are one of the NFT holders, you are able to engage and play the pick'em game. As you win, you get access to rewards, prizes, things like that. But it's much more about this idea of community-based marketing, which is what we're very focused on going into the future. And that helps us a lot with how we learn and how we innovate and iterate for consumers.
So following on that, we talked a little bit about measuring your efforts, right? And there's always, I think, a jump straight to like ROAS, or there's a jump towards case sales, or something having to do with something that impacts direct impact into quarterly revenue performance. Let's just say that. But we talked about something called, that you wanted to talk about a little bit, which was about attention, right? And using that as a much more powerful metric in your communications, in your communication strategies, in your plans, and your measurement of success. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think being a consumer product group, you're never going to have total clear insight into, this ad drove this exact sale. And I think if you're deep in the attribution game, you also know, like, it's not just about last click attribution, even if you have that kind of business and that kind of insight. We have always operated in more of a, let's say murky space where we don't know exactly which impression is driving which sale. That being said, I think as an industry, when we got into digital, you remember the first phase, it was like, okay, we're buying digital, we're putting our mix money in there. And then the second phase was like, well, wait a minute, did the ad load? Like, is anyone tracking viewability, right? And then we all got really excited about viewability. And that was, I'm sure there was probably 3 days in Brand Innovators that was just about viewability back in the day. And I think now it's like, okay, great, the ad loaded, but did someone actually watch it? Did someone care? Was there a moment that as a brand I could actually make an impact? And so that's where I think this evolution towards attention is becoming much, much more relevant for us as an industry. It's not just was the ad there, it's not just did the ad load, but it's ultimately did consumers see it? And did I have an opportunity to kind of interact with them in a way that was memorable?
And then, not just the attention and the lean in, but let's talk a little bit about the context too, the content that it's in, like with the contextual targeting and the thought of that, right? Because we're awash with audience data that we can, certainly have precision targeting around any kind of demographic or characteristic. But how important is the content and the contextual environment to you?
So I think we're coming into an interesting world where what's old is new again, which is to say, yes, we have a lot of precision data that we can use to understand consumers at depth, but we also know that what consumers are willing to give us access to and are willing to share with us is changing and evolving. And I think in order to meet the moment as a marketer, you really need to be able to live both in this precision audience-driven world, but also you need to understand how do you start to build segmenting and targeting in a smart way using contextual thought, right? We know that people are much more receptive to messaging when it is within a passion point that they have. That has been true for decades and decades and decades. There's tons of research. I'm sure there's someone here from Nielsen that can speak at much more length about it than I can. But that relevancy and that passion point driven approach is such a critical part of how you make impactful marketing, I think, going forward.
All right, I think we have a few more minutes, so let's talk about next year, and hopefully it's a bit better than how it looks right now. There's a lot going on in the world, and you are trying to cover a lot of it. But let's talk about the future and how are you thinking about next year, strategies, and I think we talked a lot about partners and the notion of agility. I'd love to kind of touch on those concepts for a little bit.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we know is that our success will never be defined by managing what we know today. Our success will always be defined by managing what we don't know. And the way that we can capitalize is really, I think, first on leveraging external partnerships that help us with understanding what we don't know. And then I think the second thing is building teams in a smart way such that we're able to meet the moment and be nimble like we had to all be during COVID. I think we saw some of the most creative work in our industry during COVID. And my big hope is going into 2023, we all remember and take some of those skill sets that we built in that period as an industry around thinking on our feet, around being able to adapt to what consumers need in that moment to build things that are super effective and super creative.
Well, thanks, Tracy. This has been great. Great to meet you and spend some time talking about this, and wish you all the best for the remainder of the year. Do you have a World Cup prediction? Sorry to put you on the spot.
I mean, we're in the U.S., so I got to say the U.S. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting year. I mean, so we were talking about this earlier. 1986 was the first year we were the sponsor of the World Cup. It was also the year that Argentina won. It is also Messi's last year that he's playing. And, we are fortunate to be working with him on our campaign for Budweiser called The World Is Yours to Take. So I kind of hope Argentina wins if it's not going to be the U.S. I think that'd be cool.
They're pretty excited in Argentina about it.
Yeah.
It's great.
And they have a good team.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
You.
Thank you all.